We are left with the conclusion that ID is the way to go if that is where the data of science really leads. Intuitively, general ID seems to cut the mustard on this score with flying colors. It's just plain hard to deny that there is design in nature and that that design is anything but intelligent, as I said at the beginning of this series. And it does seem that IC holds for some systems, and if IC does hold for some systems, special ID is true as well. ID is not so bad after all. ID is not so bad, I submit, even if you are not persuaded as I am of the real presence of ID. This observation is the next point I wanted to make. It may be that you are more scientifically literate than I am and have a much better understanding of biology and so on than I do. And I can clearly see the flaws in such paradigms as I see. If this describes you, I say that is fine. But I also say that you ought to at least tolerate the ID movement. By tolerate, I do not mean that you accept it as true or mandate that it be given equal time in high school biology classes. Rather, my request, my plea, is to echo the central message of the infamous movie Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. There have been multiple professors who have lost their jobs, or at least suffered within their jobs. Some I believe were fired, but others denied tenure and that kind of thing. But still allowed to keep teaching. There's been multiple professors that have run into trouble because of their holding to ID. Notice very carefully that these are not high school teachers, but university professors. And also note that they weren't necessarily expressing their views on ID in their classes. Dr. Gonzalez, for example, only expressed his views on ID in a book entitled The Privileged Planet. This was not the topic of the discussion in class time. And he was denied tenure because of this book he wrote, The Privileged Planet. The university denied that was the reason that he was denied tenure, but couldn't come up with a coherent alternative explanation. Meanwhile, certain off-the-record statements tell a different story, I understand. It was entirely unfair how Gonzalez and others have been treated. If you are honest, you will agree with me on this point, even if you do not agree on the point of the veracity of ID. You are certainly free to reject the presence of intelligence in the design you see in nature. On the other hand, if you are in any kind of position of influence, please do not abuse your power. If one of your colleagues privately holds to ID, please do not persecute him or her because of that. And it really is difficult to deny that this sort of thing goes on. As a matter of fact, it has happened to Ben Stein himself, who was, as you may know, the host of the Expelled movie. He was asked to give a commencement speech at a particular university. I can't recall offhand the name of the university. But then after the movie came out, Expelled, they called Mr. Stein back up and told him they were going to get another speaker. The reason the university gave publicly for why they canceled Stein's speech is the real kicker. The university claimed they were tolerant of all persons and open to all intellectual persuasions within the marketplace of ideas. Well, what is ID? A particular intellectual persuasion. It seems the universe is very accommodating to people of all persuasions, so long as the people of that persuasion agree with the university. Now, it seems that Stein himself is a proponent of ID, at least he thinks it's a viable, a good concept. but I do not think he explicitly endorses ID in the movie Expelled itself. Heck, the movie itself does not really explicitly endorse ID. Rather, it merely points out the objective fact that there are proponents of ID and they have been treated unfairly. Don't shoot the messenger. The fact that such intellectual fascism exists raises an interesting question. Why do mainstream evolutionists react so vehemently to ID? It is one thing to say the ID movement is factually in error or that it is pseudoscience, but it is quite another to crusade against the people involved in the ID movement. Aren't scientists supposed to be dispassionate, objective people who are led by sound reason? If ID is so completely retarded, why not just publish an article about it in Discover magazine or write a book about it? There is no need to personally attack people. And yes, there have been publications against ID, I'm aware of that. The problem with these, however, is that they invariably misrepresent ID. We know ID is complete rubbish even though we have absolutely no clue what it is, such publications pridefully proclaim. If you are going to reject something and try to persuade others to reject it as well, you should take the time to understand it first. That's just common sense. None of these observations answers my original question, namely, why are some evolutionary scientists so hostile not just towards ID, but also towards ID proponents? It is hard to say for sure. One possible answer, which may or may not be the actual reason, is that perhaps mainstream evolutionists feel threatened. It may be they are so entrenched in their pet theory or pet theories. There's different kinds of evolution, of course. Maybe they're so entrenched in these pet theories that for another person to even question evolution makes them feel uncomfortable. Evolution as they understand it makes them feel uncomfortable. People have always questioned evolution, of course, but the idea says you ask for empirical proof, check out the bacterial flagellum. And this may be too much for the mainstream evolutionist to handle. What are they to do with objective scientific evidence that they are wrong? At any rate, the fact remains that ID per se is not incompatible with evolution. Some in the ID movement believe in macroevolution from a common ancestor and others do not. The fact of full-blown evolution, if it is a fact, is a separate issue from ID. ID is itself only concerned with the strictly scientific claim that there is intelligence manifested within biological design. The claim may turn out to be false, but it does not hurt to ask the question. Answer it scientifically. Don't rule out the question from being asked a priori and arbitrarily. And if you do forbid the question from being asked, at least know what it is you are forbidding.